Rain pounded the dark, empty streets as Karen trudged back home, shivering in the night chill. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled with her keys, desperate to escape the eerie silence that blanketed the neighborhood. Just hours ago, this quiet cul-de-sac had been the pristine, manicured jewel of the Willow Oaks Homeowners Association, a suburban utopia where she reigned as queen. Now it felt like a ghost town. Her heart raced as she glanced around, half expecting to see movement in the shadows. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting an ominous glow on the freshly uprooted flower beds that lined her driveway. Karen's mouth went dry. This was no random act of vandalism. This was a declaration of war. Steeling herself, she hurried inside and slammed the door, triple-locking it behind her. In a foyer mirror, she saw the haunted look in her own eyes. How had it all fallen apart so quickly? Just yesterday, she had been the undisputed queen of Willow Oaks, her iron-fisted rule over the HOA unquestioned. Now her perfect world was crumbling, and she had no idea who was responsible. Forcing herself to take a deep breath, Karen strode into her kitchen and poured a generous glass of wine. She needed to think. As she sipped the rich Cabernet, her gaze drifted to the framed HOA bylaws hanging on the wall. A constant reminder of the authority she wielded. No one dared defy her, until now. A sudden noise from the backyard made her freeze, wine glass halfway to her lips. Slowly she set it down and crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. Her perfectly manicured garden, lovingly tended for years, lay in ruins. Soil was overturned, flowers ripped from the earth. And in the center of the destruction, a solitary figure moved with purpose, planting something new. Karen's blood ran cold. This was no random act of vandalism. This was a calculated strike, a direct challenge to her power. Gripping the windowsill, she watched as the intruder worked, methodically transforming her pristine garden into something entirely new. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. As if sensing her presence, the figure paused and straightened up. For a moment, their eyes met across the darkened yard, and Karen felt a chill run down her spine. There was a cold, steely determination in that gaze, a refusal to back down. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Karen trembling with a mix of fear and fury. This was no mere act of vandalism. This was a declaration of war. Draining the last of her wine, Karen strode to her home office, her mind racing. She would not be intimidated. She was the queen of Willow Oaks, and no one, not even this brazen intruder, would take that away from her. Sitting down at her desk, she began to formulate a plan, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the HOA's extensive records. If this was a war, then she would fight, and she would win. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but Karen's mood was anything but sunny. As she stepped out onto her front porch, the pristine facade of Willow Oaks seemed to mock her. Everything was perfect, from the meticulously manicured lawns to the gleaming SUVs lining the streets. And at the heart of it all stood the imposing headquarters of the Willow Oaks Homeowners Association, a testament to her power. But now that power felt tenuous. The memory of the intruder in her garden last night still sent a chill down her spine. Who was this person, and what did they want? More importantly, how had they managed to breach the carefully guarded sanctum of the HOA? Squaring her shoulders, Karen strode across her lawn, her heels clicking sharply on the pristine sidewalk. She had a meeting to attend, and she would not be caught off guard again. The HOA offices were abuzz with activity, but the mood seemed tense. As Karen swept through the doors, heads turned and hushed whispers followed in her wake. Ignoring the murmurs, she made her way to the conference room, where the rest of the HOA board was already gathered. "Karen, so good of you to join us," said Marjorie, the vice president, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We were just discussing the incident in your garden last night." Karen felt a flicker of unease. "What incident?" Marjorie's smile widened. "Didn't you know? Apparently, someone vandalized your garden during the night." Karen's heart pounded in her ears. Vandalized? That's impossible. Our security system seems to have been disabled. Marjorie interrupted smoothly. "The cameras didn't pick up a thing." Karen's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "I want a full investigation. This is unacceptable." Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what we've been discussing, Karen. The board is deeply concerned about the breach in security. We feel it's time to review our protocols and make some changes." An unspoken threat hung in the air, and Karen felt her stomach twist. Marjorie was positioning herself to seize power, and Karen knew she had to act fast. "I agree," she said, forcing a smile, "which is why I've taken the liberty of reviewing the HOA's security system myself. It seems there's a significant flaw in the camera placement that allows for blind spots in the coverage." Marjorie's expression darkened, and Karen pressed on. "I've already taken steps to correct the issue. We'll be installing additional cameras and upgrading the system to ensure this never happens again." The other board members shifted uncomfortably, and Karen knew she had them on the defensive. Marjorie opened her mouth to protest, but Karen cut her off. And as for the vandalism in my garden, I've already filed a report with the police. They'll be investigating, and I expect the perpetrator to be identified and held accountable. Marjorie's jaw tightened, but she nodded grudgingly. Very well. We'll discuss the security upgrades at the next meeting. Karen allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She had regained the upper hand, at least for now. But she knew that the war was far from over. Whoever had dared to challenge her power was still out there, and she would not rest until they were brought to justice. As the meeting adjourned, Karen lingered behind, her gaze sweeping over the familiar HOA offices. This was her kingdom, her domain, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. The rain had returned, pattering against the windows of Karen's home office as she pored over the HOA's security logs. Her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers tapping furiously on the keyboard as she cross-referenced the data, searching for any clue that might lead her to the mysterious intruder. Hours passed, and the sky outside grew dark, but Karen refused to give up. She was determined to uncover the truth, to expose the person who had dared to challenge her authority. This was her domain, her kingdom, and she would not allow anyone to undermine her power. Finally, just as her eyes were beginning to grow heavy, a breakthrough. A flicker of movement on the security footage captured by one of the exterior cameras. Karen leaned forward, her heart pounding, as she watched the footage play out in slow motion. There in the shadows, a figure moved with purpose, heading straight for a prized garden. Karen's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the telltale signs, the careful, measured steps, the slight hunch of the shoulders. It was the same person she had seen the night before, the intruder who had dared to desecrate her carefully cultivated sanctuary. Quickly, Karen zoomed in, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she enhanced the image. The figure was too shadowy to make out distinct features, but she could see enough to know that this was no random vandal. This was someone with a purpose, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Squaring her shoulders, Karen reached for the phone, her fingers dialing a familiar number. The line rang once, twice before a gruff voice answered. "This is Chief Rawlings." "Chief, it's Karen," she said, her voice steady. "I need your help." Over the next hour, Karen laid out the details of the incident, providing the security footage as evidence. The chief listened intently, his brow furrowing in concern. "This is a serious breach, Karen," he said finally. "We'll launch a full investigation, but I have to warn you, this isn't going to be an easy case to crack." Karen's jaw tightened. "I don't care. I want this person found and brought to justice. No one messes with my garden and gets away with it." The chief sighed. "I understand, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that this could escalate. Whoever this person is, they're not afraid to challenge you." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Then they've picked the wrong person to mess with. I'm the queen of Willow Oaks, and I won't rest until I've regained control." After the call ended, Karen leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The chief was right. This was no ordinary vandal. This was someone with a personal vendetta, someone who was willing to go to extreme lengths to undermine her authority. But she wasn't about to back down. She was the pillar of the Willow Oaks community, the embodiment of its pristine, orderly perfection, and she would do whatever it took to protect that legacy, even if it meant going to war with the very person who had dared to challenge her. As the rain continued to pelt the windows, Karen's gaze drifted to the framed HOA bylaws on the wall. They were more than just a set of rules to her. They were the foundation of her power, the cornerstone of her reign, and she would defend them to the last. With a renewed sense of purpose, she turned her attention back to the security footage, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pored over every detail, searching for any clue that might lead her to the identity of the intruder. This was a battle she couldn't afford to lose. The rain had long since subsided, but the tension in the air at the Willow Oaks Homeowners Association meeting was palpable. Karen sat at the head of the table, her gaze sweeping over the assembled board members, her expression schooled into a mask of calm authority. "As you all know, we've had a serious security breach in the neighborhood," she began, her voice measured and controlled. "Someone has vandalized my personal garden, and I won't rest until the perpetrator is brought to justice." Marjorie, the vice president, shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. "We've all been made aware of the incident, Karen. The police are investigating, but you have to understand that this could be a complex case." Karen's lips thinned into a tight smile. "I'm well aware of the complexity, Marjorie. That's why I've taken matters into my own hands." She reached into her bag and withdrew a thick file, placing it on the table with a decisive thud. "I've been reviewing the security footage, and I believe I'd identified the culprit." The board members exchanged startled glances, and Marjorie's expression hardened. "Karen, I hardly think it's appropriate for you to be conducting your own investigation. That's the police's job." "Normally, I would agree," Karen replied, her tone deceptively calm. "But this is a matter of utmost importance to the Willow Oaks community. We can't afford to let this go unchecked." She opened the file, revealing a series of grainy security camera stills. The intruder was captured on our perimeter cameras. As you can see, they appeared to be methodically surveying the neighborhood, focusing on my garden in particular. Marjorie leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Do you have any idea who this person is? Karen's eyes narrowed. I have my suspicions, and I believe it's someone within this very room. The board members erupted into a flurry of shocked murmurs, and Marjorie's face flushed with anger. How dare you accuse one of us? This is outrageous. Karen raised a hand, silencing the room. I have evidence, Marjorie, and I'm not afraid to present it to the police if necessary. Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. Fine. What's your evidence? Karen flipped to the next page in the file, revealing a detailed map of the Willow Oaks neighborhood. As you can see, the intruders' movements were highly strategic. They'd avoided the areas with the best camera coverage, and they knew exactly where to strike to cause the most damage. She pointed to a section of the map. This is the blind spot in our security system, the exact spot where the vandalism occurred. And according to our records, the only person who has access to that information is you, Marjorie. Marjorie's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Karen cut her off. Don't even try to deny it. I know you've been eyeing my position as president of the HOA for years, and now that you've found a way to undermine my authority, you're going to do whatever it takes to seize power. The room descended into silence, and Karen could feel the tension building. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she was willing to risk it all to protect her domain. So, Marjorie, she said, her voice like ice, what do you have to say for yourself? Marjorie's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Karen saw a flash of pure fury in her gaze. But then the vice president seemed to deflate, her shoulders slumping in defeat. You win, Karen, she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. This time. Karen allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over, and she was more determined than ever to defend her kingdom. The air in the Willow Oaks community was thick with tension as the fallout from the HOA meeting reverberated through the neighborhood. Karen had emerged victorious, her position as president firmly intact, but the sense of unease that had settled over the community was palpable. As she made her way through the pristine streets, Karen couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. The carefully manicured lawns and gleaming SUVs seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of the fragility of her power. Marjorie's defeat had been a victory, but she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Reaching her front door, Karen paused, her gaze drifting to the freshly planted garden. The intruder's handiwork had been meticulously undone, the soil smoothed over and the flowers were planted, but Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the damage had already been done, that the very foundation of her kingdom was crumbling. Sighing, she stepped inside, her eyes immediately drawn to the framed HOA bylaws hanging on the wall. They had always been a source of comfort, a tangible representation of the power she wielded, but now they felt like a weight, a constant reminder of the battles she had to fight to maintain her control. Warily, she sank into her chair, her fingers reaching for the glass of wine that sat on her desk. As she sipped the rich, full-bodied liquid, her gaze drifted to the security footage that still played on her computer screen. The intruder's movements were etched into her mind, a haunting reminder of the threat that lurked beneath the surface of her perfect world. A sudden knock at the door startled her, and she froze, her heart pounding. Cautiously, she moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. A figure stood on her doorstep, partially obscured by the shadows. Steeling herself, Karen opened the door, her grip tightening on the wine glass. Hello, Karen. The voice was familiar, and Karen's eyes widened in recognition. Marjorie, what are you doing here? The vice president's lips curved into a small, humorless smile. I'd wanted to apologize for my behavior at the meeting. Karen eyed her warily. Apologize? That's a rather sudden change of heart, don't you think? Marjorie sighed, her gaze drifting to the freshly planted garden. I realized that I let my ambition cloud my judgment. I allowed my desire for power to blind me to the true needs of the community. Karen's brow furrowed. And what, exactly, are those needs? Marjorie's eyes met hers, and Karen was taken aback by the sincerity she saw there. Harmony, Karen. Willow Oaks was built on the principles of community and cooperation, but we've lost sight of that. Karen's grip on the wine glass tightened. Are you suggesting that I've failed in my duties as president? Marjorie shook her head. Not at all. You've always been a strong and effective leader, but sometimes even the best intentions can have unintended consequences. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. And what exactly are you implying? Marjorie's gaze drifted to the garden once more, that perhaps we become too focused on maintaining the appearance of perfection at the expense of the true spirit of Willow Oaks. Karen felt a flicker of unease. Are you saying that the intruder was right to vandalize my garden? Marjorie held up a hand. Not at all. What they did was unacceptable, and they should be held accountable. But perhaps we can learn from this experience and find a way to balance our need for order with our desire for community. Karen's mind raced, trying to make sense of Marjorie's words. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation or a calculated move to undermine her authority? "I'll need time to consider what you said," she said finally, her voice measured. Marjorie nodded. "Of course. I'll leave you to it, then." As the vice president turned and walked away, Karen felt a chill run down her spine. The battle lines had been drawn, and she knew that the war was far from over. The rain had returned, pounding against the windows of Karen's home office as she pored over the latest security reports. Her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers tapping furiously on the keyboard as she cross-referenced the data, searching for any new clues that might lead her to the mysterious intruder. It had been weeks since the incident in her garden, and the police investigation had yielded little progress. The elusive figure had seemingly vanished, leaving no trace behind. Karen gritted her teeth in frustration, her grip tightening on the edge of her desk. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the intruder was still out there, biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The thought sent a chill down her spine, and she found herself glancing nervously out the window, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. Marjorie's words still echoed in her mind, a persistent reminder of the cracks that were beginning to show in her carefully constructed kingdom. The vice president's sudden change of heart had left Karen feeling unsettled, unsure of whether to trust her overtures of reconciliation or to view them as a calculated ploy to undermine her authority. Sighing, Karen reached for the framed HOA bylaws that hung on the wall, her fingers tracing the intricate calligraphy. This was her foundation, her source of power, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. Steeling herself, she turned her attention back to the security footage, her eyes narrowing as she watched the same footage for the 1000th time. There had to be something she was missing, some clue that would lead her to the intruder's identity. Suddenly, a flash of movement on the screen caught her eye, and she leaned forward, her heart pounding. It was the figure, the same shadowy silhouette that had haunted her dreams. But this time it was different. The intruder was moving with purpose, heading straight for the Willow Oaks Community Center. Karen's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the security camera feeds from the center. Sure enough, there was the figure, slipping through the shadows, their movements calculated and precise. Gripping the edge of her desk, Karen watched as the intruder made their way to the community center's main office, pausing briefly before disappearing through the door. She felt a surge of adrenaline, her mind racing with possibilities. What could the intruder be after? And more importantly, how did they gain access to the community center, the building that was supposed to be off-limits to all but the most trusted HOA members? Quickly, Karen pulled up the security logs, her eyes scanning the entries for any sign of unauthorized activity. And there it was, a single entry, a security code that had been used to bypass the main entrance. Her breath caught in her throat. That code belonged to her, the master code that gave her unfettered access to every corner of the Willow Oaks community. But that was impossible. She had never shared that code with anyone, not even the other board members. Karen's heart raced as the realization dawned on her. The intruder wasn't just a random vandal. They were someone with intimate knowledge of the HOA's inner workings, someone who had infiltrated her domain and was now using her own power against her. Gritting her teeth, Karen stood up, her mind made up. She would not be defeated, not by this mysterious intruder or by the cracks in her perfect kingdom. Grabbing her keys, she stormed out of the house, determined to confront the trespasser and reclaim her rightful place as the queen of Willow Oaks. The rain had long since stopped, but the air in the Willow Oaks Community Center was thick with tension as Karen strode through the dark, empty hallways. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floors, echoing through the silence like the thunderous heartbeat of a predator closing in on its prey. She knew the intruder was here, somewhere, hiding in the shadows. The security footage had shown them slipping through the doors, their every move calculated and precise, and Karen was determined to confront them, to expose their true identity and put an end to this maddening game of cat and mouse. As she approached the main office, Karen paused, her hand gripping the doorknob. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, her senses heightened, every nerve ending alive with anticipation. This was her kingdom, her domain, and she would not be usurped by some nameless, faceless intruder. Steeling herself, she flung the door open, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room. At first she saw nothing, the office seemingly empty. But that movement in the corner caught her eye, and her breath caught in her throat. There, silhouetted against the faint glow of a computer screen, sat the figure, the mysterious intruder who had dared to challenge her power. Karen's fingers tightened around the doorknob, her knuckles turning white as she took a step forward. "I know you're here," she said, her voice low and steady. "Show yourself." For a moment, the figure remained still, unmoving. Then, slowly they rose from the chair, their features gradually coming into focus as they stepped into the light. Karen's eyes widened in shock. "Marjorie?" The vice president's lips curved into a small, humorless smile. "Hello, Karen." Karen felt a surge of rage and betrayal. "You! This whole time it was you." Marjorie shrugged, her gaze unflinching. "I warned you, Karen. I told you that we needed to find a balance to remember the true spirit of Willow Oaks, but you refused to listen." Karen's mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of the revelation. "So, what? You decided to take matters into your own hands? To undermine my authority?" Marjorie shook her head. "It's not about undermining your authority, Karen. It's about restoring the balance, about remembering what's truly important." Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "And you thought vandalizing my garden and breaking into the community center was the way to do that?" Marjorie's expression hardened. "I did what I had to do to get your attention. You become so obsessed with maintaining the facade of perfection that you've forgotten the needs of the community." Karen felt a chill run down her spine. "So what? You're going to try and seize control of the HOA?" Marjorie's eyes gleamed with a steely determination. "No, Karen. I'm going to dismantle it." Karen's heart pounded in her ears as the realization sank in. Marjorie wasn't just challenging her authority, she was making a play for the very foundation of Willow Oaks itself. "You can't do that," Karen said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "The HOA is the heart of this community. If you destroy it, everything will fall apart." Marjorie's expression remained impassive. "Then perhaps it's time for a change, Karen. A change that puts the needs of the people first, rather than the whims of a power-hungry few." Karen felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Marjorie was no longer just a rival. She was a force to be reckoned with, a threat to everything Karen had worked so hard to build. And as the two women faced off in the dimly lit office, Karen knew that the battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer just a fight for control, it was a fight for the very soul of Willow Oaks. The tension in the air was palpable as Karen and Marjorie stood facing each other, their gazes locked in a silent but intense battle of wills. The air was thick with the weight of their confrontation, the very foundations of Willow Oaks trembling beneath their feet. Karen could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was no longer just a fight for control, it was a fight for the very soul of the community she had dedicated her life to protecting. "You can't do this, Marjorie," she said, her voice low and steady despite the turmoil raging within her. "The HOA is the cornerstone of Willow Oaks. If you destroy it, everything we've built will crumble." Marjorie's expression remained unflinching, her eyes narrowing slightly as she regarded her adversary. "That's precisely the problem, Karen. We become so obsessed with maintaining the illusion of perfection that we've forgotten what truly matters, the needs of the people who call this place home." Karen felt a flicker of uncertainty. Marjorie's words struck a chord, a nagging feeling that perhaps she had indeed become too focused on the facade of order and control. But she wouldn't let that crumble, not after everything she had sacrificed to build it. "The HOA is what keeps this community functioning," she argued, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. "Without it, there would be chaos, disorder, everything would fall apart." Marjorie shook her head, a hint of pity in her gaze. "Don't you see, Karen? The true chaos comes from the very system you've dedicated your life to upholding. The rules, the regulations, the endless bureaucracy, it's suffocating the life out of this place." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Marjorie cut her off, her voice rising with a newfound intensity. "Look around you, Karen. The streets may be spotless, the lawns perfectly manicured, but at what cost? We've lost sight of what truly makes a community, the connections, the mutual respect, the sense of belonging, and all in the name of your precious rules and regulations." Karen felt a lump forming in her throat, an unfamiliar feeling of doubt creeping in. Marjorie's words were like a knife slicing through the carefully constructed armor she had built around herself. "I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marjorie's lips curved into a humorless smile. "That's where you're wrong, Karen. This isn't about destroying. It's about rebuilding. Rebuilding a community that truly serves the people, not the whims of a few self-appointed leaders." Karen's eyes widened, a realization dawning on her. "You've been planning this all along, haven't you? The vandalism, the breach in security, it was all part of your scheme to undermine the HOA." Marjorie nodded, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "I had to make you see, Karen. I had to show you that the system you've sworn to protect is rotten to the core. And now I'm going to tear it down piece by piece until we can rebuild it on a foundation of true community, not empty rules and regulations." Karen felt her world crumbling around her, the very foundation she had dedicated her life to safeguarding now threatened by the very person she had once trusted. And in that moment, she knew that she had to make a choice, to fight to the bitter end or to accept that the world she had once known was irrevocably changed. As the two women stood facing each other, the air thick with the weight of their confrontation, Karen knew that the battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer just a fight for control, it was a fight for the very soul of Willow Oaks itself. and the outcome would determine the fate of the community she had once reigned over as its undisputed queen.